Hello and welcome to the Thoughtful Leadership podcast from Ambitious. Have you ever sat there on a Sunday night dreading the idea of going into work the next day? Or perhaps you're a leader trying to drive real change in the business when it comes to people and culture. Well, my guest today has a wealth of experience when it comes to building cultures for success and businesses. He is the former CEO of Gymshark, and he took that business to international acclaim and also unicorn status. He's since moved on and founded his own organisation called Whanau, which is all around supporting businesses as they scale up. And he's also the chair of passenger clothing on the side. So I'm delighted to have with me today Steve Hewitt. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Real pleasure to be here.
Well, it's really good to have you here. And we'd love to start a little bit with that kind of culture piece. So why is it so important? And I know you once said you wanted Sunday night to feel like Christmas Eve for your employees. So can you talk a bit about that first?
Yeah, I think, people say to me, how do you build a brand? How do you build an organisation? People will talk about disruption and talk about operational systems. Ultimately, it's people who build a brand. So you've got to make sure that you build the right environment for those people to thrive. For us at Gymshark, very, very fast growing, 4 million to 500 million across, 6-7 years off one revenue channel, which was amazing. But without creating the environment for the people, we would never have got that. People talk to me about and ask me the question, what was Gymshark's superpower? Was it the product range? Was the accessibility, the pricing? Was it the international coverage that the brand had through some amazing fitness influencers? Yes, all those things are important, but ultimately it always comes down to the people. And we had a statement where we talked about all the time we were sort of obsessed with creating an environment that everybody wants to be part of. And that's the easy part, getting everybody sort of wanting to join your organisation. But the special bit is where they never want to leave. And those words are really easy to say, but really hard to do. Making sure that you effectively build the right CV and resume into your organisation rather than sometimes the best CV or resume into your organisation. So, living and breathing those values every single day. And
can you tell me a bit, I think listeners would be really interested to hear a bit about your sort of background prior to Gymshark. I think you were in the corporate world and learned a lot on the job there. So can you talk a bit about some of those skills that really sort of supported you in then that kind of step up into leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a Geordie born and bred, so very proud to be from Newcastle upon Tyne. And in those early years, what I sort of learnt from my parents' great friendship group was really values. Was lucky enough to go to university for 4 years and then on to the US, where I actually started my career in sports coaching of all kinds of sort of backgrounds. But yeah, coaching was where I sort of probably first got the love of having the feeling of actually being able to motivate a group of people and actually seeing the impact that has. So when I moved on from that into, as you said, the big sort of corporate sports world, I spent many, many years at Reebok, had some great years there. And really what you learn at a big corporate is how to be professional. And what I mean by professional is how to plan, how to think about how you're going to build segmentation plans for retailers, how to build product segmentation plans when you're thinking about range architecture. So all of the things that effectively build a multi-billion euro business. I also learned a lot from that corporate world about how not to do things. And what you find sometimes in that corporate world, certainly back then, I'm going back a few years, maybe 15 or so years, it was a little bit traditional. And what I mean by that is you had to be an A player. So A player was somebody who didn't show any fear of failure. Generally back in those days was a little bit, well, if you were male, you definitely got ahead of females in the organisation, how the world has changed and great in that regard. So what I did find, and there was a guy who I used to work for at Reebok who was probably, in terms of like commercial brain, he was formidable. Like everything I've learned commercially was from him. But the one thing that he couldn't do was to build an environment where people could thrive based on actually learning from mistakes. If you were if you made mistakes, it was like you were shown the door. I sort of said to myself, if I ever get chance to lead an organisation, I'm going to take all of the good bits, but we're going to actually all unravel all of the bad bits and apply that to the next environment. So because there were some really good people at Reebok who weren't quite A players, but I think if that same person had have invested time into those people, they actually could have been even better than what he would have deemed as the A players. So I think, and also people grow and develop at different stages and different rates. So for me, it was that corporate world and sporting world. It was great grounding on how to plan. For example, when I first joined Gymshark, the plan A wasn't particularly great.
Right.
Never mind. I mean, plan B, plan C, plan D did not exist in that organisation. And actually, you need more than one plan because not everything you touch turns to gold. So I did learn a lot of good stuff that we've sort of applied into those fast-growing years at Gymshark. But as I said, probably the superpower at Gymshark was some of the stuff that I saw in that corporate world, which I thought is not going to work in this new era of brand building. And it ended up being a superpower, as I said, at Gymshark for sure.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's changed so much over time, the idea of leadership and what that looks like, that authoritative style of leadership, which you probably saw far more often 20 years ago. And I don't think we're perfect now. I'm sure there are some organisations that still run like that, but more and more are thinking about how you can be collaborative and engage your workforce. And what are some of those tactics that you deployed then when you started at Gymshark, came in as CEO, working with the founders? What were you looking to change? How did you go about doing that? And how were you different than the sort of that traditional leader?
I think the biggest skill that you can have as a leader, and certainly, you know, I remember Ben and Lewis, the co-founders of Gymshark, calling me dad. I was like dad at work because I was the old guy. I mean, the average age when I first joined Gymshark was about 20 years old, and I definitely took the average age up ever so slightly, but I definitely took the average age up. And brands back then had been built in a way which was, we're going to build the biggest product range, sell to as many retailers or distributors and build the sales number and therefore build growth and the trajectory in that way. The one thing that a young Ben and a young Lewis had done was actually identify that you didn't have to build a brand in that way. So my first job actually going in as the guy with all of the experience was to actually listen first. Because most people go, well, what's a 20-year-old going to teach me? You know, I'm 15, 20 years further on my journey in my career than them. What on earth can they teach me? And actually, the best ideas that ever came out of the Gymshark story, certainly when I was CEO, was actually from the person who wasn't the old person with grey hair and with a lot of experience, wasn't the person with the incredible first-class honours degree. It was actually the person who was probably just brave enough to be a little bit disruptive in the way that got the brand thinking. So we had a sort of a saying which said, where everybody else is sort of zigging, we're going to zag. And people say to me, oh my goodness me, like as CEO on the leadership team, we did a phenomenal job at, you know, in those fast growing years. And yeah, I guess we did. We sort of, we're pretty good in some ways, but most of the great ideas that came out of that growth journey did not come from the boardroom. It came from people. That young person in the social media team or that young person in the customer service team. They're probably the most overlooked function in any organisation. And actually, when you take the time as CEO to actually listen to those people. So one thing that I religiously did on a daily basis was I walked the floor. Yep. Now, this is obviously pre-COVID, pre-lockdown. The world's changed with hybrid working, so it's a lot harder now to get in front of people because of the sort of the way things have changed. But certainly back then, I would spend and discipline myself to spend an hour every single day to walk the floor. And actually just understand also the culture barometer at within the environment. So I talked about, you know, creating that environment. You've got to be able to sort of touch it and feel it. One thing we didn't have was none of the leadership team had an office. Didn't have an office. I used to sort of hot desk in different functions on a daily, weekly basis. And probably my best barometer within the organisation, we had a lovely little restaurant called Refuel. And I remember a lady called Sim who used to sort of manage the queue as it came in at lunchtime, and she was my barometer.
Amazing.
I used to sort of say to her, tell me what people are thinking today, tell me what people are feeling. So actually the restaurant staff, who saw pretty much every single person on a daily basis, would actually be sometimes my best bit of like almost feedback in terms of how the organisation was going, because sometimes your fellow people in your C-suite will give you the answer that you want to hear as CEO, and actually sometimes that answer is not the right answer. Yeah. So lots of things. One thing that was absolutely game-changing for us, and I talk about this all the time, is communication. Most brands and organisations are obsessed with external communication. You will know this as ambitious, that sometimes the greatest piece of external communication, you may be lucky that it might last 24 hours, maybe slightly longer, but not much longer. Internal comms, you get that wrong, that gets remembered forever. Even average internal comms can actually last forever. So you have to be obsessed with being transparent, and for me as CEO, one of, I think, as a superpower as a CEO is to make sure that you are accessible, like all the way through every single function at all levels in your organisation. And that means you have to do things like walk the floor and actually spend time with people who are not in your immediate direct report group, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you talk a lot about purpose, and I wanted to come onto that and finding your North Star. Can you tell people who are listening what that means and why that's so important? And then we can talk a bit more about kind of what that entails. Yeah,
100%. So in many organisations, you find that there's one consistent theme, especially with sort of fast growth or brands or businesses that have got lots of opportunity, is that, and this is the analogy I love, is that they become butterflies on a leaf. So, and what I mean by that is they chase the shiny new thing. So they're on this leaf in terms of this opportunity today, this week, and we communicate that to the team. But next week there's something that bigger or better, or we think is bigger and better, that comes along, and suddenly the strategy that worked last week or last month is now a completely different strategy.
Yeah.
And all you're doing all the time is, one, you're overcomplicating the business, and two, your own team don't understand where you're going. So you actually, very, very quickly have this sort of rudderless organisation which doesn't understand where it's heading. So a North Star in the way that we look at things, and we sort of introduced this into the sort of the Gymshark environment. Back in 2017, we'd gone from 4 million to 8 million to 12 million. Then we had this sort of 12 to 42 million pound leap in terms of sales from one year to the next. And then 42 to 100 plus million. And people said to me, what did you do differently at that point? Because, at that point or before that point, we were going through these 4 million pound lovely growth trajectories, nice and easy to manage, to suddenly, 10 times in that.
Step up.
And that's tough. But the one thing we did do is we built this North Star, and maybe North Star is not the right terminology, but it's terminology that worked for us. And it was based on, again, back to simplifying things. It comes down to 4 buckets. Buckets is my favourite word in business, by the way. I always say that in Newcastle we say, ma'am. If my mum's come into your business and after 5 minutes she doesn't understand the business, you've overcomplicated your business. So keep it super simple. Even the terminology, because the terminology you use in your organisation can't be the terminology that the C-suite understands, or your really gifted, intelligent, well-educated CFO.
Yeah.
Actually, the youngest person who is maybe less experienced also needs to understand that terminology. So buckets was a word that I knew that everybody would understand. So North Star, 4 buckets, starts with purpose. So purpose is all about why you exist. And I'm not getting spiritual there. It's actually why your business, why your brand exists, and staying focused against that is really important, because if you stay true to that, you actually stop becoming this butterfly in a leaf. Yeah. Once you work out why you exist, you then go to the second bucket, which is the audience, which is now understanding who I exist for. So most organisations that we go to work with now, and most brands, we sort of say, very quickly, the founder of that organisation has understood what its purpose is, because it's probably the reason they start the brand. There may be a gap in the market or an opportunity. But when you get to the next bucket of who's your audience, almost their instant answer is, well, it's everyone. Now, marketing budgets are fairly limited, right? Or they're never
How do you do that? Yeah,
they're never big enough. So your audience actually has to be even more laser focused than the purpose itself, because actually your marketing dollars have to stick.
Yeah.
So those are the two things, and you get those two things right, and you sort of stay on that course for at least 36 months. Reality is something like purpose, probably like all the best brands in the world, their purpose doesn't probably change. Their audience may tweak over time, but their purpose doesn't change. But if you get those two first buckets right in combination, then you've generally got a really sticky brand that's able to build a community. And I think, I always say to businesses and brands, make sure you have the permission to build a community. If you do those two things really well, you've got a much better chance. And stay disciplined against those two things. Don't be opportunistic. Don't be that butterfly in the leaf. Actually say yes, but rather than yes, and. Once you've got those two buckets effectively thought about and communicated out, then we're back to building the environment. The third bucket's all about your value set, all about how you're going to behave as a brand to that external community or customer, but also how you want to resonate as an employer to your employees. So that's really critical. And if I had Philip Dorr, who's my CFO at Gymshark, he's CFO for now, he's sort of been my almost like, it feels like lifelong CFO. He would say, those three buckets are great, Steve, in isolation, but in isolation, they're a little bit fluffy. And he would be right. So the fourth bucket in the North Star is all about your business model itself, because the maths have to work.
Yeah,
you can't have this ridiculously lovely purpose that is laser focused on the audience, disruptive as hell, if actually you're not profitable and there's no cash in the bank.
Yeah.
So those four things have to work in sequence all of the time. And build a North Star with a sort of a 36-month view, because most organisations either look at a 5-10 year business plan. Well, lots of things happen in 5 years, changes of government. We just had one in this country. There's one just happened in the US. So 5+ years is too long. So anybody asking you to build a business plan over 5 years, it's not worth it. And also, a year's not long enough.
Because the financial year, everyone gets very focused on that, don't they? And the numbers and hitting.
And especially if you've got like a product-based business, because your product team are generally working 18 months to 2 years ahead anyway. So you have to work longer than just a year.
Yeah.
So we found that having North Star, a 36-month roadmap, and being super disciplined, saying no way more times than you say yes, I think you get a much better chance of success.
Yeah, and I love the simplicity thing we find with a lot of clients when you're talking to them around their brand values and their elevator pitch. It's kind of actually, how would you explain who you are to someone in the pub? I always say that at night. If you're someone who's got nothing to do with this industry, how would you explain what you do? Keeping it really simple. And
you know what, you just hit on a chord there in terms of values again. We talked about people building businesses and making sure that, you fly in formation. When many people do interviews and they're looking for a new hire to come to the organisation, generally we always start with, okay, what's your experience? Can you game change a business? Give me lots of examples where you've won. Not many times do we actually start with somebody's value set and actually working out, do their values actually talk back to the values that you're trying to build at your own organisation? And actually, if we started there, you might find that actually you've got a much better success rate of actually embedding the right person in your organisation, not necessarily the best person.
Yeah. And I think just back on the point you made around your sort of CFO and that last bucket, that kind of growth piece. And, yes, you're absolutely right. You've got to profit, haven't you, and grow at the end of the day. That's kind of the focus of the business. And I think that's always the challenge in a lot of people's heads, isn't it? Marrying the kind of, if you're looking at people, planet, and kind of, the profit piece, and the three together, particularly looking, and, we're looking and exploring thoughtful leadership, and that comes in all forms. Do you think they really correlate? Does great kind of, management of people and culture, does that really correlate with a great successful business? Yeah,
absolutely. Management of people, again, in the UK, we're very polite. We don't like to give feedback.
Stiff upper lip.
I'm one of the game-changing things that we definitely did at Gymshark, and actually I didn't learn this from the corporate world, was giving balanced feedback all the time. Actually, in the corporate world, you get feedback which is generally one way, which is actually we failed and we're not working hard enough and we found that actually having this and being obsessed with this feedback culture on a weekly basis, so, giving people really positive feedback on a job well done, but also it may be actually we need to give some constructive criticism about maybe the way that they're behaving or the way that, they haven't got the ability to turn up to a meeting on time. And I think in the UK, especially British-based businesses, maybe because we're polite in our culture, is we sort of hold off from giving people feedback because we don't want to hurt their feelings.
Yep.
And actually, it's not about hurting their feelings. It's actually about not having a hard conversation, but having an honest conversation and giving them live-based, fact-based examples. And actually, once you do that, and you do that regularly, it becomes a lot easier. And I can tell you now, that person will thank you.
It helps them develop, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Rather than, blow smoke or avoid that, what we think is a difficult conversation. And we end up being, the analogy I give, it's when we give somebody feedback, we generally give it too late. So the analogy I give is this sort of boiling, a kettle with boiling water coming over the spout. By the time we give them the feedback, we are so emotionally charged that actually the feedback comes out in the wrong way.
Yeah.
And it means relationships being broken. And sometimes actually might mean somebody leaving an organisation. And actually we should take a view of being the simmering kettle and not letting that water boil over at any point. And that means regular, consistent feedback, but with live-based, fact-based examples.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
So management of people is absolutely key. But it has to start with the leaders. If the leaders can't do it, then, don't expect anybody else to do it. And I'll tell you a very funny story in lockdown. Gymshark was that business where only the critical people were allowed in the environment, which is generally the product development team, because product development, you need to sort of do in collaboration in-house, face-to-face. It's very difficult to do that from afar. And the leadership team, senior leadership team, were the only two teams really allowed in Gymshark at the time. And we had a one-way system because of health and safety, lots of arrows in this big building. And there was I needed to print something off on the photocopier. And if I followed the one-way system the right way, it was like about 150-yard walk. But if I shortcut across the one-way system, it was about a 15-yard walk. Now, the difference between those two yardage at my age is quite big. And I remember having a look around, going, you know what, I'm just gonna walk across the one-way system. And there was a product intern who worked in our product development team who clocked me do it. And she said, Steve, can I give you back to feedback? She says, can I give you some feedback? I was like, yeah, sure. She said, if you can't do it, don't expect anybody else in the organisation. This is a 20-year-old product intern who is sort of fresh at university, giving the CEO some feedback on my behaviour. And boy, was she right.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did, we were on Slack. First thing I did was go out on Slack and actually apologise to the whole organisation, because I felt like I had to show vulnerability at that moment, because if I do that and show the right behaviour, then there's more chance of everybody else doing it.
Do you know, I was about to come on to vulnerability. How important is that, and also failure, in being a great leader?
I mean, Dave Parry, work with, Chief People Officer, he was like the glue. He sort of definitely kept me honest many, many occasions. And I remember Dave having this sort of statement phrase, which was vulnerability trust. Is like, actually, can we be really naked with one another around the leadership team, and can we then take that right through the organisation? And I came from that corporate sport world, which was all about alpha male, can't show any chinks in your armour. And I learnt that through spending lots of time with Dave and lots of great people. Actually, you work out that vulnerability is a superpower, and actually saying sorry, or actually, I've got that wrong. And it's actually, I worked out very, very quickly in my CEO role that when you're CEO, when it goes well, you've got to give away all the credit. And when it goes badly, you get a decision wrong, you actually have to take all the responsibility. And actually, not many leaders are very good at that. Most leaders, when it goes well, take all the credit.
Yeah.
And when it goes badly, it's, no, I'm going to get into blame culture, and it's definitely not on me. We had this approach where there was no stairwell conversations. So if it needed saying in the meeting, we had it out. We sort of agreed. More importantly, we disagreed. We had what we call positive conflict all the time. But when we left the meeting, at whatever level, in whatever function, we didn't have a stairwell conversation. What I mean by a stairwell conversation is, and there'll be many people who listen to this who will know exactly what I mean, right? Where you leave the room, everybody's also in the room, everybody's agreed, everybody's disagreed, but most importantly, everybody's aligned. And as soon as they walk out the meeting, they walk down the stairs with somebody and it's like, what did you think that meant? Yeah, I thought that was rubbish. Or did you agree with her or did you agree with him? No, I thought that wasn't right. Rather than actually stay in the meeting and actually have it out. Yeah. Or even worse, you go back to your team and say, listen, there's a decision coming down the line. I disagree with it, but I've had to go along with it. It's like, due respect, it's bullshit. Yeah. You can't have a stairwell conversation if you want real vulnerability in your organisation and real transparency, then you've got to be able to show weakness and certainly failure. Gymshark's defining moment, Ben, if he was on this podcast, would absolutely agree. Our defining moment was our biggest failure, but really sets us up for success, which was Black Friday 2015 when literally our world ended, our systems imploded. We didn't have a plan B. Our plan A wasn't particularly great, but we didn't have a plan B or a plan C or a D. But we learned the hard way. We sort of spent 4 or 5 months clearing up the mess of really doing a terrible job with our customers. We lost somewhere between 30 and 35% of our customer base. We had Trustpilot, people saying, robbed my money. It was, we lost some sleep. But actually, it was the defining moment because it actually worked out how we wanted to act as a business and act as a brand. And we started to employ people who were better than us at that point, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And how important is diversity and inclusion? So you're obviously selling, Gymshark product to a wide range of people, and everyone says, really your business needs to reflect society. Yep. Was that something that you needed to work hard at? Was that something you really focused on as a business? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, in the early years, if I look at Gymshark back in 2014, it was dominated by young white males. If you look at Gymshark, where Gymshark went to, the female category became a much bigger part of the business than the male category, but it never started in that way. So, you can't. I remember our first product range in our female category was absolutely terrible because we had a bunch of young males building the product range, trying to work it out or making it up. So we learned very, very quickly if you want to really understand the consumer, then you need to employ people who mirrored that consumer. So suddenly we started building a product team which was built by some ridiculously talented females who were far better than this alpha young male that sort of where Gymshark first started. But talk about diversity and inclusion in terms of size. Where I remember people thinking that you could only work for Gymshark if you had a six-pack. Legitimately, people did not apply to work for Gymshark because they thought they needed a six-pack. And, definitely not the case, but that was the perception. The brand started to resonate in the US. Well, in the US, the human being is generally bigger than a European person. So actually, having a size range for both male and females, which was initially 4 sizes actually now had to go to 7 or 8 sizes, which was absolutely right. So, really, really important to have diversity and inclusion in your business, especially when you've got a community based in 182 countries. Yeah, it's super, super important. So, I think we ended up with probably at the highest moment for me in terms of number of employees, we had over 1,000 people, relatively equal gender split. Over 30 nationalities working in our organisation, but it never started. Was Gymshark initially, and I definitely would fall foul of this. Did we have unconscious bias? 100% we did. Yeah. So you have to work every single day at that because we sometimes fall into that sort of trap because of the way maybe we've been brought up or whatever. But you definitely have to work hard at it for sure.
Yeah, and I'm just.
I don't think it ever stops. By the way,
no, I'm sure.
I don't think there's a perfect answer to diversity and inclusion either.
No, absolutely. And we've been talking to a number of guests about that, through this podcast, and it's definitely an area of, obviously it's a huge amount of focus on it. I'm interested on the international piece, and I want to move on in a moment to talk a bit more about your sort of current venture for now and founding that. But the international piece and keeping that culture going and strong when you go to that international sort of, level. How do you do that and foster that and keep it consistent across all those different countries that have different nuances and needs?
Yep.
And, that must have been, is it a real challenge again? Is it about working hard, having the right people in place?
You know what the simple answer to is it's really tough. We had 5 offices in 4 continents on a time zone that had, I think, 14 or 15 hour differences, depending where you were. So whether you worked in our product sourcing office in Hong Kong, and we had a value called family first. Well, family in Hong Kong isn't a value that they would think about at work. So actually that word family wasn't a particularly great value. Didn't really sort of I guess move across to that country very well. It just didn't convert very well. To then Denver, Colorado on the other side, which was obviously 6-7 hours behind Solihull HQ. So the real answer is it was really tough. How do you start in a place where you're not having to fix that or unravel that over time? It's about, I go back to, just make sure you hire people who are better than you, but also make sure that the person that you hire is the right person, not the best person.
Yeah.
So don't employ the person. If I've been to Tenerife, they've been to 11erife. That obsessed. If you ever, I like Simon Sinek, and he talks about trust versus performance, and sometimes the high performer actually is the low trust person, and they can actually kill an organisation. So make sure that you do all of your homework through the interview process, but little things like onboarding at Gymshark, the first onboarding session wasn't about look at our success or look at our growth trajectory or look at this fitness influence or look at this product range. It's actually about, back to our value set, about how and what we expect from behaviour, whether you're in Hong Kong or whether you're in Solihull or whether you're in Denver, makes no difference. Here's the set of values that we're running this organisation on. Now, there is nuances. So Americans speak English, yet in certain ways it's a completely different language. So, for example, if somebody's looking to hire a C-suite person to go into your American leadership team, then just be aware that they are driven by money more than a European-based person. Now, I'm probably being a little bit stereotypical there, but that market is driven by success, and success is driven by money, in the way that culture works. So that's important. So you've got to understand that actually hiring an American team is going to be a lot more expensive than hiring a European team. But to win in America, you've got to have an American set of eyeballs on your brand, because a British set of eyeballs doesn't actually translate that well. We all think we understand America because we've been to New York shopping for a long weekend or been to Florida, Disneyland, but Americans speak English, but it's a very different culture. In fact, there's lots of subcultures in America, depending on which region that you're in. So you definitely have to hire local, but you've got to make sure that even when you hire local, that they understand how the brand was built, what's important in the environment, and actually how can they help you embed that in their locality. The one thing that we tried to do at Denver in the early days was we tried to get our originals over to the US as we built that office. The challenge COVID hit, so travel restrictions applied. We weren't able to do it as well as we could have done, and I think it actually hurt us a little bit. Do I think we transcended our values into that American environment as soon as we would have liked? Absolutely not. And I think the learn from that is, should we have paused a little bit longer and waited until lockdown restrictions had ended before we actually pressed the button on that environment? The reality is probably, but I'm now back to failing, right? I'm back to failing and doing it really quickly. So
absolutely.
So you have to work hard at it. It's like everything. You have to work hard at it. If you take it for granted, you will be unraveling a whole load of problems culturally, for sure. Yeah,
really great, to listen and hear all your sort of stories and experience from Gymshark. But now you founded Whanau.
Yep.
Can you tell us a bit about that and why you've gone down this route?
Yeah, no, great question. Why did I find Whanau? You know what? I was lucky enough to be a shareholder at Gymshark. So when we got valued at $1.5 billion back in 2020, I was lucky enough to be one of the shareholders who'd sort of de-risked. So you work out that actually you're not working for money any longer. And actually that was great, because I don't think I ever worked for money. Yeah, obviously you've got to pay the mortgage and you've got to, whatever it is, you've got to live your life. But you work out it's sort of back to like actually purpose and vocation. One thing I didn't do well, not one thing that Gymshark didn't do well. One thing I didn't do well as the CEO of Gymshark in my time there was to give back. And that hit me in a train journey coming out of Birmingham. So it was Birmingham have this very traditional German market every Christmas. It's very romantic, and we were coming back out of Birmingham with a couple of couples, and I remember getting on the train, and there was three young lads, 16, 17-year-old lads on this train. Two of the lads had their feet all over the seats. Now, I'm back to values, back to my working class Geordie roots, which was, what would my mam do in this situation? My mam, as an soon to be 81-year-old person, would go, lads, can you just get your feet off the seats? And I was like, lads, could you just get your feet off the seats? I did it very politely, and I remember my wife sort of elbowed me going, you're going to get yourself in trouble here. I was like, no, like, anyway, these two lads were drunk, they were probably on other stuff, and they weren't particularly great humans. Give me a little bit of banter, but it was fine. The third guy that was with them was really quiet. His name was Ali. Found out afterwards his name was Ali. And I said, why are you knocking around with these two guys? He said, well, I don't have any friends. That's who I'm sort of almost left with. And I was like, right. I said, where do you live? He said, I live in a town called Kidderminster. And I was like, that's the next town to me. I know Kidderminster relatively well. I said, where do you live in Kidderminster? He went, I live in St. Basil's. And I was like, what's St. Basil's? And he was like, it's a young homeless charity. He said, my sister lived there, and things didn't work out properly with my parents, and for whatever reason, bad hand, whatever, bit of misfortune, he ended up in St. Basil's with his sister. And I was like, what else do you do? He said, I'm doing a sports diploma at the local college. And I was like, so he's 16, 17 years old, he's doing a sports diploma, he's probably heard of Gymshark. I said, have you heard of a brand called Gymshark? And he went, yeah. I said, would you like to do a week's work experience there? Because sometimes you need to back the underdog. I love backing the underdog. Yep. And I felt like this kid just had something about him where he just needed a little bit of a break in life, just somebody to back him. So he was like, yeah, I'd love to do a week's work experience at Gymshark. He said, but nobody can get in there. It's back to that statement, create the environment that everybody wants to be part of. And I was like, well, I know a few people there. I didn't tell him what I did. Anyway, I said, here's my number. He called me on the Sunday, and he said, hey, Steve, it's Ali from the train. I'm just giving you a call about the Gymshark thing. And I was like, yeah, you've got a week work experience. He's like, oh my goodness me, how have you been able to do that? And I said, well, I work at Gymshark, I'm the CEO. And he was like, you're kidding me. Anyway, spoke to the college. He came in, he did a week work experience. I've never seen a more curious, obsessed kid in my entire life in terms of the amount of questions he asked about how we built the business. He went on to, we found out a year or so ago that he went on to go to university. Now, I'm not saying university is the be all and end all, but sliding door moment for him, and the fact that you sort of knock around with the wrong friendship group, you can end up being a bad human. And more importantly, a sliding door moment for me. And I was like, you know what? To follow Gymshark in terms of its rocket ship years is difficult to find in terms of like purpose. But I think I found it in that moment, which was, I need to give back. So the reason I started for now, this is a really long answer to a very short question, is I needed to give something back because I hadn't done enough of that when I was CEO of Gymshark. And that morphed into, actually, you start working with the Birmingham Children's Hospital in St. Basil's, actually, to sort of do the full circle on the train journey. And actually, that's not enough, because actually we needed to use our superpower to actually do what we did with Gymshark, was effectively help the underdog who was following its dream on a fast trajectory. So anyway, when we put out there that we're in the business to help young founders and fast-growing trajectory businesses, literally, I was overwhelmed. It was like we had scores of brands contacting us to go, yeah, I could do with your help. And then I worked out I can't do that all by myself. So I basically got together some of the old leadership team at Gymshark who either moved on or whatever. And we sort of call ourselves the Avengers. I'm not sure we're the Avengers. But basically, effectively we help SMEs who are in either fast growth or need some help with their cultures, their environment bills, or maybe the maths don't quite work, and making sure that we're just helping them get marginal gains on their P&L. But ultimately, people say to me, what do? We do one thing. We make and help businesses become better versions of themselves. So the analogy I use is something that the All Blacks rugby team talk about when they play, is the shirt that they get on their debut. When they hand it back at the end of their career, the shirt is in a better place than the one that they got in the first place, and that's what we do. And a percentage of the fees that we charge, we actually put back into charity. So it feels like it's this sort of growth for good. Our purpose is all about growth for good.
Yeah.
And we've also ended up investing into a couple of brands. I never said I'd ever do that, but again, you sort of you come across some great people who you just go, you know what, I'm also going to back you as well. So we help them financially as well.
And presumably you go into some of these businesses and you're like, actually, there are people that are wrong for the business. There are things. Are you very honest with your kind of consultancy? Is that the kind of focus?
We are
brutally honest.
We are. There is no the kind, right? You have to be direct and you have to be honest, because otherwise you just waste time. We have one red flag. I don't care how good your business is. I don't care if there's going to be a financial event and you want as part of it. If you've got an ego, we have got zero interest in working with you. So egos equals arsehole, and we'd rather have a hole than an arsehole is our sort of statement. So that's our only sort of walk away position is ego, and also probably the second one is if you're not willing to listen. So don't ask us the question if you don't really want to hear the answer. So very direct in our style. Very honest, but it's all about making them become a much better version of themselves as quickly as possible. And yes, sometimes actually we have to I help them identify that you may not have the right team, or if you want to stick with that team, then you actually need to spend some money and training developing them, because they're not just going to train and develop themselves.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's actually investing into the team rather than actually just hire from the outside too, or usually it's a balance of both.
Brilliant. And I've got one final question. I think I probably know the answer to it already. But if you were sort of walking into a business as CEO tomorrow, what was the first thing on your agenda that you'd want to look at?
I would see if they are aligned. So I have this very romantic, very beautiful analogy of, have you ever seen Canada geese fly? Canada geese fly in a V formation. And the reason they do that, the only flock of birds in the world to do that, by the way. And they do that because it is super efficient and therefore super effective. So they get to their destination spending the least amount of energy because they are super aligned. And the most organisations that I meet who say that they're aligned, especially senior leadership teams, especially the CEO actually, or especially the founder, who say, yeah, we're completely aligned. And actually, you go in there and ask some what I would deem as basic questions around the 4 buckets and the North Star. And the reality is, Laura, that they are so misaligned, it is frightening. And sometimes when that moment hits them, they're like, you know what, yeah, we need to change it up. And you know, I don't think there's any organisation that flies in a perfect V. But that's the aspiration, is you've got to try and get to that perfect V. So for me, that's where I'd start. I'd start with, are they aligned? Are they flying like Canada geese? And let's just have a bit of a deep dive into their North Star, those 4 buckets.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been so good to talk to you and understand more about kind of, I think, the importance of culture and people and obviously kind of, you know, having that alignment as a business. So thank you for your time today, Steve.
Pleasure having me here, and it's been a real privilege to talk to you. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.